Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I offer this amendment, I want to thank the Department of Legislative Services and all the amendments they've helped me with in addressing this bill. It's been up, the House bills come through, the Senate bills come through. We've drafted a number of amendments. They haven't been offered in trying to work them through the committee. They weren't accepted. They were intended to improve the bill. I'm opposed to the underlying bill. This amendment would change that position. Oftentimes I'll offer amendments, and sometimes they've been accepted, and I still voted against the bill. But this would make a difference in this legislation, the underlying bill. The amendment creates, it's very simple, a pilot program, a 5-year rotational harvest pilot program for oyster recruitment. In the pilot program, it would give the Department of Natural Resources the authority to set rules and guidelines for rotational harvest. So people are not set aside by what that would mean. Rotational harvest would authorize the Department of Natural Resources to promote or allow a harvesting in a sanctuary. And so if you think about that, I know there's this general philosophy that if we didn't harvest oysters, that the oyster population would come back, phenomenally. But the science doesn't show that. We've got a oyster sanctuary survey that came out this year, and over half of our sanctuaries are either dead or they're close to it. They're dying. Something that isn't mentioned and is the practices that we've taken on in the state of Maryland for oyster management. If you look back to the Ehrlich administration, we changed course. We implemented something called power dredging. And at the time, power dredging was highly controversial. It was seen as a boon for the watermen, and it would be destruction for the bay. Since that was implemented, since power dredging was allowed, we've seen bottom and areas of the bay rebound like no one could ever imagine. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, when the O'Malley administration took power, our oyster management policies changed dramatically. We implemented a bay-wide sanctuary program. And you may have heard about this, that a minimal amount of our bottom is put into sanctuary. That's not just misleading, it's just false. Those sanctuaries were half of our good oyster bottom. So half of the bottom that was producing oysters was put into sanctuaries. Those are the areas that were just reported to be dying or dead. We know right now the areas in the Chesapeake Bay that are the best, the strongest, the most astounding are those that are worked in the public fishery. This amendment creates a 5-year pilot program, a limited pilot program to implement rotational harvest. The underlying bill is flawed because it doesn't look beyond what's been proposed by something called the Oyster Advisory Commission. We've heard about the Oyster Advisory Commission. We've debated the Oyster Advisory Commission. I'm an ex officio or a member. I'm not sure because my role's been changed. But I can tell you the Oyster Advisory Commission is following the plan that was put in place by the O'Malley administration. It's the sanctuary plan. We've debated the 5 major tributary restoration. This was proposed to the state of Maryland as being this innovative new way where we are going to bring these tributaries back like they had never been seen before. And when it was first proposed, we were told by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Bill Goldsboro, that it was so good that oysters were not just going to repopulate, they were going to grow out of the water like the bay appeared when John Smith came. We're going to have vertical oyster reefs. Well, that didn't happen. So shortly thereafter, there was a new philosophy, and that new philosophy was, well, they're not going to grow out of the water. We're not going to have vertical oyster reefs, but they're going to spread larvae all over the bay with the tide and the currents. That hasn't proven to be true. The next narrative that's been given to us is that, well, we're no longer going to do these major tributary restoration using federal money. We're going to use state money. And somehow, by using state money, that's a better approach to what we're doing with oyster restoration. Those are distractions. Those are distractions. What's going on right now in the bay is not good. because our sanctuaries aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Now, there's a proposal at the Board of Public Works. It's very controversial. Our Baltimore County delegation will yell, kick, and scream about it. It's to take less than 10% of man-o-war shoal and use that shell, which would supply the bay for many years, to help repropagate oyster areas, oyster habitat. That's proven to be very effective. It's always worked. It worked in the past when we dredged shell from Love Point for many years. Okay, so if man-o-war shoals is going to be put on hold, what are we going to do to grow oysters? This is the next best option. It's rotational harvest. And it's not a windfall for the watermen. This is a good practice. It works. Virginia is light years ahead of us right now. They use rotational harvest. No one wants to propose it. It is not included in this bill, which just continues the current path that we're on right now, which is not working. The public fishery is doing great. They're going to report to us this year that they've caught over 500,000 bushel. They're doing fantastic, and they're doing fantastic because they cultivate and work the bottom. They grow oysters. Sanctuaries don't do that. And I appreciate your indulgence. I know this amendment is coming very late in the process, but in order to have this debate, in order to push a bill forward, this issue has got to be brought up. It must be discussed, and it's absolutely critical to the future of oysters. Otherwise, what we have before us is a bill that says we're doing everything we can for oysters, but we're really not, and that's the reality. And I'll debate the bill a little bit too with this amendment, and that the bill does provide money for spat and shell and restoration work in a place called Eastern Bay, my home, my backyard, a place I know like the back of my hand. And I can tell you, out of that money, the spat and shell that we're putting in, it has a 98% mortality rate. What is the investment on that? There's a Bay Bottom study in here. Oh, by the way, the Eastern Bay, the work in Eastern Bay is already programmed. It's already planned to be done, and it really doesn't need to be in the bill. There's a Bay Bottom study in this bill also. That's also already being prepared to be done, and the University of Maryland Environmental Sciences is included in that. That should be done by the geological study at the Department of Natural Resources. I'll go on and on. I know this is a lot this is a lot for everyone to digest, but let me tell you, add this amendment to the bill and it will taste a lot better. I urge everyone to vote in favor of the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.